Cian Tracey, the Irish Independent, is with us to talk to us about the ongoing situation in rugby in England and in Wales. Cian, good morning to you.
Morning, lads. How are you?
Did Wales want to get their stuff out first? Did they want to get their claws in? Warren Gatland wasn't really a runner for England, was he? Looks like the see Borthwick thing.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, even the Ronan O'Gara stuff, I think, was all a bit of shadow boxing. Ronan O'Gara probably didn't do too badly out of it when you think that he's getting a nice new contract in La Rochelle now as well. But yeah, I think the succession planning. Obviously, England were hoping that it didn't come now. It was after the World Cup. I think Borthwick has long been identified as the man, so probably no great surprise if it happens today or tomorrow when Eddie gets the chop.
Why are they not giving the job to Scott Robertson? What is wrong with these people?
Yeah, I still think Scott Robertson, if truth be told, is waiting for the All Blacks job. Now that could be complicated by the fact that Joe Schmidt has come into the All Black setup, because when he was doing so well with Ireland, he was being touted as, you know, a possible next man, and New Zealand and the All Blacks generally want their coaches to be involved in the system, and that was one of the flies in the ointment for Joe Schmidt because he was over here. So since he went back and obviously working with the Blues, and now he's obviously very much involved with the All Blacks, so he's a potential future candidate as well. But I did notice in Warren Gatland's press conference yesterday, he gave a ringing endorsement of Scott Robertson as well. So I think Gatlin probably knew that he wasn't going to get that All Blacks job either. Even since he went back to the Chiefs, it hasn't been going that great for him. So, yeah, it's a merry-go-round, really, isn't it? It's a bit like, I imagine, what covering football is like in the Premier League when managers are getting sacked, because you just don't really see it in rugby that often at all. So maybe it's a bit of a sea change for the game as a whole, you know?
I guess Borthwick has been involved with England as well before the 2019 World Cup as forwards coach. So, like, what does he bring to it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, his first coaching gig was with Japan under Eddie Jones, so he's very much an Eddie Jones man. So yeah, like, Leicester won the league, the Premiership last season under him, and there was no doubt they played well. But I was covering the Champions Cup quarter final when Leinster went over to Welford Road and did an absolute number on them, and I thought, like, it was just very uninspiring. They don't play attractive rugby whatsoever. I mean, you know what you're going to get with a Steve Borthwick team. So what do England and the England supporters want? I mean, they got booed off against South Africa, and the attacking game plan has been really poor under Eddie Jones for the last couple of years, and that seems to be what's been, you know, the straw that broke the camel's back. So I was kind of refreshing my memory. Like, the Leicester Tigers attack coach is Richard Wigglesworth, who's a player coach. So is Borthwick going to bring all of his Leicester Tigers backroom staff in? Is there someone else going to come in? Because the attack seems to be what you're crying out for. There's no doubt he'll bring stability to the set piece. He's a really good forwards coach, but it's a calculated risk all the same, even from his point of view, because I think he would have probably known that after the World Cup it's probably my gig if I wanted. But now coming in, what's to say the Six Nations won't go well, the World Cup won't go well, and then all of a sudden he's got this contract possibly until the next World Cup, but England fans are already doubting him. So I think it's a strange situation, but England have probably backed themselves into the corner now.
Were you surprised that they did make the decision to get rid of Eddie Jones? Like, this is all part of Eddie Jones' general schedule. Be really bad before World Cup, but be good at the World Cup.
I was a bit, but I suppose when you go back and look at it, you have to see some evidence of what they're actually doing, and I just don't think we have. Like, he's really nailed his colours to the Marcus Smith, Owen Farrell axis, and that hasn't really worked at all. And that's going to be interesting as well, because you look at Marcus Smith and how well he's played for Harlequins, and he hasn't been able to translate that kind of form to the international stage at all. And if you go back to Borthwick, Leicester left George Ford go at the end of last season, and they got in Handré Pollard, who hasn't really played yet because he's got an injury. But Handré Pollard isn't the type of out half either who's going to, you know, set your game alight. So what does that mean for someone like Marcus Smith, the golden boy of English rugby? You know, they're still kind of holding out hope that Tuilagi, you know, is the player he was several years ago, and even when he's fit, he's looked a shadow of the player he is. So Eddie Jones has kind of pinned his hopes on a couple of players, and then everyone else around him seems to have constantly been coming in and out of the team, because in the middle of it all, I think they've lost their identity. I think you'd be struggling to pick England's best 15, I think, at the moment, because they just have been no consistency in selection at all. So from that point of view, maybe I'm not surprised. But yeah, you're right, Ger. Like, if Eddie Jones does one thing and one thing well, it is get teams right for the World Cup. We saw it in 2019. Obviously they came unstuck in the final, but you think back to that semi-final performance, and
sensational.
It was incredible. It was one of the great performances, definitely of recent years. So yeah, like, I'm surprised in a certain way, but also when you hear fans who were ultimately the ones paying the very expensive tickets going to Twickenham booing at the end of a game, which again is like, you don't see that at rugby too often as well. Eddie Jones coming out saying he doesn't care what people think. Like ultimately, like these people who were paying, and the tickets in Twickenham are bloody expensive, they're paying his wages in the job. So ticket sales apparently been slow for next year's Six Nations as well, which I imagine comes into when the bean counters are sitting down with in the review. This all has to come into it as well. So
if you're Borthwick though, you're looking at the World Cup draw and you're thinking, oh my God, that's a pretty good draw, especially the way that all the teams are playing at the moment. So Australia could absolutely knife you on any day. That's possible. Wales now with a new head coach, it's possible. Japan are on the same side of the draw, and Argentina are on the same side of the draw. That's including pool stages, quarters, semis, and then you're through to a final. Like, it's right there for them. So I can see why the temptation is like, well, all I got to do is pick 25 who I think are going to be my main 25, work the hell out of them, decide on a style of play, be very, very, very conservative, and you know, swing low, sweet chariot.
Yeah, but like very conservative, is that going to please like the England supporters? Because this is what do they want? Do they want winning rugby, or do they want to see?
Well, I think what they'll do is they'll have a little bit of patience for English player, not quite legend, like, you know, Borthwick, good player, not great, right? Am I right in thinking, did Borthwick win the World Cup? Was he part of that? Was he
probably just after? Maybe top of my head.
Certainly, he was a first teamer after that, where they weren't very good for a long period of time, and so soldiered through a long period. You know, very well respected, still very young. I think he gets a little bit of wiggle room in a way that Eddie Jones' wiggle room rolled out like after the last World Cup.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like I said, if the Six Nations doesn't go well, we've already seen England fans are booing their team off the field. Like, English rugby is in a strange place at the moment, and I think part of the reason why the supporters aren't happy is when you look at this style of play. Actually, ironically enough, Leicester, a side who won the Premiership last season, they've definitely moved to a more expansive game plan. Even Saris this season, who were top of the table, have really reinvented the wheel. Not reinvented the wheel, but in terms of their identity and what they're about. So week in, week out, supporters are seeing teams like Harlequins throwing the ball around and playing great rugby, but that doesn't always fully translate to Test rugby. But there's just been so little evidence of that at all, and Marcus Smith, like I said, is the perfect example of that. And yeah, it's going to be pragmatic under Steve Borthwick. I think he'd be very well respected by the players as well coming in, but he doesn't have a lot of time to shape like his identity and his team. The Six Nations, the year of a World Cup, you're kind of thinking you're fine-tuning things rather than kind of, you know, ripping up the script and starting again. I wouldn't put too much stock in the 3 or 4 warm-up games that they're going to have, because they're always kind of really shadow boxing. You don't want to get injured, players don't want to get injured and stuff, so he really doesn't have a lot of time to turn it around. And like we said, that's what Eddie Jones does well. He gets teams ready for the World Cup, so it's going to be interesting. I just think it's going to be fascinating that if Borthwick comes in, who is going to be in his backroom team. Like I said, Richard Wigglesworth is a player coach at Leicester. One guy who's very interesting is Aled Walters, who was with Munster when Rassie Erasmus came in and did an unbelievable job. Went to the Springboks, helped them win the World Cup. He's the head of athletic performance. Leicester snapped him up. He helped them win the Premiership. So he's a guy who could come into England and I think make a big difference as well.
He was on Borthwick was a member of England's wider 03 World Cup squad, but then narrowly missed selection to the final 30 apparently. Would you not rather be taking over an England team on the tough side of the World Cup draw? Like,
no,
less expectation.
No, you get beaten.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but there's another argument to it.
They could play really badly and reach a World Cup final, and the side that they play in a World Cup final could easily have been absolutely decimated by injuries.
Yeah, and the same can be said for Wales as well. Like this exact conversation that we're having, but I think the Wales situation, I'm sure we'll get onto, is a little bit different. I just think that Eddie Jones' track record, it's just been such a turnaround from Bill Sweeney and the RFU, who were backing him to the hilt constantly, and he still has the best winning percentage record of any English coach. And November 73%. Just ahead of Clive Woodward, I think, his good buddy, which is interesting. They seem to be having a nice little tete-a-tete in the media over the last couple of years, but like I said, when the fans are getting on top of you, it's probably time to make a change. But I'm still a little bit surprised, and even from Borthwick's point of view, he comes in and, like I said, if it doesn't go well at the first in the Six Nations, he's under massive pressure going into the World Cup.
Clive Woodward's latest pointed comments towards Eddie Jones were pretty good. So he pointed out that semi-final win in 2019 against the All Blacks, but he said he'll be remembered for the misguided rhetoric and unfulfilled promises. Like, do you think history looks back on Eddie Jones's tenure positively in any stretch?
Yeah, not winning the World Cup in 2019 after delivering, like we said there, one of the great performances. I mean, that was probably a black mark in his name. And then it's just been downhill ever since then, because you're kind of thinking, okay, this is what England are capable of on their day, and they just haven't been able to build on that at all. They've been going backwards. But I still think history will be kind to him for sure. It'll be interesting. I think he's been linked with kind of going into America now. So
on an 8-year deal?
On an 8-year deal, which you can imagine there's a lot of zeros at the end of his salary. So like, that's a very, very different type of gig. So you'd imagine he's gone in with the World Cup being over there in mind, and kind of maybe it's more of a director of rugby type role. So interesting times in the rugby landscape. Like, meanwhile, we're all here kind of getting ready for the Champions Cup, and across the water they're supposed to be getting ready for the Champions Cup as well, but coaches are being fired left, right and centre. So it's mad times.
Yeah, clubs, more clubs look like they might get stuck down the sinkhole. What about the Warren Gatland situation then? This seems less shocking in many ways, that like Pivac was on a very sticky wicket for the whole time. It looked like they'd made some recovery in the summer, but he just couldn't keep it going.
Yeah, that's less surprising. I mean, when you lose to Georgia and Italy at home in the same year, you were really kind of on thin ice, especially then when Warren Gatland conveniently takes a gig, over here, and was a Prime Video he was doing, and he's kind of hanging around and going around visiting the Welsh clubs and saying, okay, like, I haven't gone away here at all. And like I said, I think a lot of that was down to the fact that he realised when he went back to New Zealand that the All Blacks job just wasn't going to happen. Chiefs thing hasn't gone all that well for him. So it's funny, like, reading the coverage over the last few days and on Twitter and stuff, people seem to have forgotten that kind of at the tail end of Gatland's era that he got a lot of criticism for the style of play, Warren ball, and we think back to the Lions, like how dour that was. And yeah, I don't know, I think it's kind of selective memory almost. Warren Gatland's going to come in. I think the big question is he going to move with the times? Because the game has moved on, and we saw that in South Africa on the Lions tour. Even South Africa themselves in November have shown signs of playing a little bit more width and stuff. So is he going to change, or is he going to come in and expect to play the exact same style of play with a squad who was not as good at all as the squad that he had? Because he was working with a golden generation when he was having all that success with Wales, which often kind of gets papered over a little bit. Like, he doesn't have that calibre of players to call upon now. So there are a couple of good young players. Like, I mean, a guy like Lewis Rees-Zammit has almost fallen off, become the forgotten man, because again, Wales just haven't been getting the best out of him. So it's interesting. Like, Pivac did a really good job at the Scarlets. He's the only kind of Welsh coach coach of the Welsh regions to have won a bit of silverware of the last a good while. But he came in trying to play that Scarlet style of play, and it just didn't work. Like, we were talking there about playing all the bells and whistles rugby that doesn't always translate to test rugby, and we saw that with Wales. So, and then he tried to revert back, and he realised more towards the Warren Gatland game plan he didn't have the players to do that. So but I've no doubt that Warren Gatland will definitely galvanise everyone. It's just whether he can, like I said, he can kind of fine tune his, like, Sean Edwards was a big part of his success. He's not going to be there. Who's going to be his attack coach? Is he going to keep Stephen Jones, who really didn't do well, you'd have to say, under Pivac? So
he is good at that, though, isn't he? He is good at getting people to join him, and that's the one thing you would say about his ability to reinvent. It won't be him doing the reinvention. He'll get somebody else who knows more about it. Yeah,
well, he's normally he's very much a director of rugby type figure. He likes to have a coach on the field who's doing that kind of stuff for him. But at the same time, like, getting Warren Gatland in is great, and I think most of the supporters will be really happy, but it doesn't fix all the issues in Welsh rugby, and that is the big kind of overarching sense. Now, it was interesting reading the press release with regard to his announcement that it's potentially true to the next World Cup, and that he's going to be involved in a root and branch review. So this isn't necessarily, which I think a lot of people would have assumed, that he was coming in for next year. That's it, a big fat paycheck, and he's riding off into the sun. So if you can get someone like Warren Gatland in, who knows Welsh rugby obviously like the back of his hand, and actually fix some of the issues, because even throughout his time there, he would have butted heads with the Welsh Union quite a lot. So if he's coming back under conditions that, okay, we're going to make changes, then it could be an absolutely genius move. So like Ireland going to Cardiff first up in the Six Nations suddenly becomes a lot more interesting, doesn't it?
Those grenades, the little needle, the lot of needle that Warren Gatland has with Ireland is great, and it actually adds something, I think, to that. We've kind of missed it, whereas when Pivac was like,
Yeah.
Vanilla.
Well, nice, you know. I mean,
Particularly if you're losing Eddie Jones, you need Warren Gatland back in on weeks like that.
his time at the Chiefs was a complete disaster. Like that, we shouldn't. So he definitely went home with the notion of I can get the All Blacks gig, and then nothing went right. So when he signed, he signed a 4-year deal with the sabbatical to take over the Lions, which immediately is like, okay, so you're coming, you're going to take charge of our club, and then you're going to leave us for a while to go and do another job on the other side of the world. Okay, it's okay, yeah, okay. And then they lost every game. And then while he was away on his sabbatical, the team miraculously improved. Like, with no significant change in some players, but no significant change of like playing stock, which would definitely make you a little bit concerned if you're a Welsh fan going, I mean, you had it and then you lost it. You don't always have it.
Exactly, yeah. And I think he went back and he tried to play that kind of, one-dimensional style of play. And if there's any country that's not going to go down well, it's in New Zealand, I think it was always a bit of a pipe dream that he was going to get the All Blacks job. I think his kind of media dealings would really put, I would imagine, the New Zealand union off and stuff, while it's great from our point of view. So yeah, like this is the big kind of question, I would say, hanging over Warren Gatland coming back. Is he going to, adapt? Is he going to move with the times? Because there is absolutely still room for the style of play, and it was bloody effective at times. But you need more strings to your bow, I think, in Test rugby these days. We've seen it with Ireland, like the rugby that Ireland are playing, France are playing, like I said, even South Africa throughout the November series. You saw glimpses of them, trying to play with a little bit more wit. So it's not a foregone conclusion, but certainly, like you said, Ireland going to Cardiff in the opening game of the Six Nations, that looks a lot more dangerous than it did with kind of Wayne Pivac in charge and continuing this.
Yeah, bring it on. That's what we say.
You're delighted for it. Is he the risk-free option? Like, it almost has a feel of Alex Ferguson returning to Man United at some point after he leaves. So there has to be risk associated with it.
Never go back to your ex, Shane, isn't that what they say? So,
we're talking about Ronaldo this morning.
There is risk, but I think the big risk is that you come in and you expect Warren Gatland to just copy and paste what has worked before, which I don't think will work. But I think, he's a smart appointment, and like I said, if he's going to come in and do the root and branch review as well, then I think it could be a really, really smart appointment.
All right, Cian, good stuff. Thanks a million for that.
Cheers, lads.
You can read more from Cian Tracey on the Irish Independent.